All right, all right. We are live. Listen, I'm so excited to be here today. Actually, this particular topic is very interesting to me because it's something that I have observed over the years. So I'm very excited about it. So I want everybody to come in. I want you to make sure that you share. Listen, everybody knows somebody that is in a, let's just say it, a toxic relationship, okay? Or has experienced a toxic relationship, and you wanted to help them, you wanted to help your friends, and you didn't know how. Or here is the help. You can do it unsuspectingly. All you got to do is just send them the little live, let them watch the live, and and they'll never know that you try to help them on the slide. So I want everybody to come in and go ahead and share. I'm going to introduce myself. You guys know who I am, and then I'm going to let Miss Tammy, the lady, okay, apostle, introduce herself. And we're going to jump right in because this is some great information. Again, you know that my name is Tiana Marshall, and I am the founder of TNST. And it is my desire to help women overcome the hindrances that keep them from walking in their purposes. And many times, and not just your purpose, but your God-given purpose. And many times, relationships are a huge part of why we get distracted, why we're thrown off focus, why we are moved from the path that God had for us and into another path. And so whenever I can talk about relationships, we can deal with relationships. I think it's a great thing because I get to help, so many women overcome that hindrance while we're overcoming other hindrances. So I'm going to ask Apostle, how do you want us to title you on here?
Well, Tammy is fine. Most people call me the Lady Apostle or Lady Tammy. That is fine. Tammy is fine.
Okay.
I was
Okay, so I'm
born
going
with
to
that
ask,
name.
I just want to make sure we're appropriate. So I'm going to
No.
ask,
Tammy is absolutely fine. Yes.
okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask Tammy to go ahead and introduce herself. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then we're going to jump right in and get started with this.
Okay, those of you who don't know me, I'm Tammy Robinson. My brand is the Lady Apostle, but I am a leader. I'm an apostle. I have a church here in Tampa and abroad, Jamaica, and do a lot of missions. But my passion is also relationship. And I come from it from a intergenerational and transgenerational aspect of dealing with trauma. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and traumatologist. Means that I'm a trauma informed therapist. That's all it means. I study
Mm.
trauma, eat, live, drink it, whatever you call it. But I study trauma, and my interest comes from my own personal experiences with trauma, and especially relational trauma, which is generational. So that's my basic focus. I have a private practice in Tampa, Florida, called Soul Path Counseling and Therapeutic Services, where I do specifically trauma, clients that deal with trauma. You type in trauma in my area, my name comes up, especially if you need a therapist of color. So I deal with this. I deal with adolescents who experience trauma, couples. I have a really large subpopulation of couples that I see. I probably see 3 to 4 couples a week, which I found out was a lot for a therapist, as well as individual clients and things of that nature. So that's my desire, to help others heal from the aspects and things of that nature, the dynamics of early childhood trauma that affects our adult lives. Because I tell most people, when we're going through things and we're saying, oh my God, something's wrong with me, and we have these behaviors, and we finally decide that we want to talk to somebody, be it our pastors, be it our leaders, be it our counselors, we're thinking that something is wrong. And normally it's not what's happening in the moment, but it's how we've learned to probably experience those moments when it gets hard, and how we behave or how we respond or how we react in those moments. And when it becomes repetitive and it interrupts our lives, that's a sign that there may be something traumatic that has happened that is triggering us and triggering how we behave and how we respond. And therefore, we may need to see somebody. And a lot of times, healing from trauma takes divine intervention as well as therapeutic intervention. Both of those things help. The church and the couch, is
Mm,
very important
mm.
when it comes to especially healing from trauma. So that's a little bit about me. I could share much more, but we want to talk about some trauma and some trauma bonding tonight, and I'm ready for it. So we can delve into it, and if there are any questions afterwards, I'm up for that as well.
Yes, so we have you with putting your information up because I know there's a lot of people that really, really have a trauma. A lot of people who have experienced trauma bonding and need to speak to somebody professional. And so, one of the things I'm grateful about is that you took the time out to talk to us about this and having the expertise that you do. You can give us the information that's needed, that's going to be beneficial to many people. One of the things that you said while you were talking, though, is we need God and we need therapy. It's interesting because when we were in Cleveland this year, one of the slogans was you need Jesus and therapy. So Jesus plus
Yes.
therapy is good. Okay.
Yeah.
So we want to get
Yeah.
that out of the way. But I want to go ahead. Tell us, what is trauma bonding? What is that? We hear it often.
Um,
What is trauma bonding?
Yeah, I think that a lot of terms, especially when it's trauma right now, that's the trend.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It's sensationalized. Trauma is the buzzword, but I think we look at it from a sensational or animated standpoint, and we never. I think unless you're in a clinical setting, it's not normalized, right? So
mm-hmm,
trauma
mm-hmm.
is essentially a part of everybody's life. Everybody has experienced some sort of traumatic event that may have affected their lives or portions of their lives and how they do things or how they experience it, and as well as their worldview. But when we talk about trauma bonding, we're talking about the way that we attach, the way that we connect with others,
Mm.
right? And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's usually viewed from a relational, more, romantic relational standpoint. But trauma bonding affects every facet of our lives. I tell people all the time, you can't be, you can't have too many traumatic or toxic relationships when it comes to your boo thing without having a total investigation and an evaluation and an assessment of all of your relationships, because the trauma comes from
Mm.
somewhere, right? And so trauma bonding, to give you a little bit of background about it, it is a psychological response. First, let's deal with the psychological part of it.
Okay.
It's a psychological response to abuse, which develops a sense of affection, empathy, and sympathy for our abuser. So basically, when you trauma bond with somebody, there is an abuser and there is a victim. Okay, and those two
Mm.
people connect, and that victim basically they bond with this person, the abuser, and basically they uh, what I would call, since make that relationship a relationship um, that is repetitive. They endure the abuse. It is very
Mm.
hard for them to get out of that relationship. And they're just connected to their abuser, right? They're connected to
Mm-hmm.
their abuser. They um, uh, basically sensationalize that relationship to the point where they deny, a lot of times they deny that even there is some aspect of abuse. The love bombing, they are addicted to that. The love bombing, the way their abuser connects with them, they can go through the physical, emotional, or verbal abuse, but then still, kind of omit the fact that the abuser has done these things to them. And when that love bombing starts, or the abuser starts flourishing them with love and the adoration,
Mm.
they connect to that. But there's a foundation, or there's a root cause for trauma bonding. And most
Mm-hmm.
people who are susceptible to trauma bonding are those who have been exposed to traumatic situations early in childhood. Adverse childhood experiences, especially being in a home that was pretty much volatile, where there's been
Mm-hmm.
domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and the child has witnessed the intimate partner violence repetitively between their
Mm-hmm.
parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, grandma, granddaddy. However, being in that environment makes us more susceptible to trauma bonding, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it also has a lot to do with our early attachment styles. You know, those insecure attachment styles, how we attach. Did we have that affection, or were we able to bond early on with our early child caregivers? And when that happens, and when there's a lack of that, of bonding, there's a lack of emotional support from a early standpoint, that
Mm-hmm.
puts us in a position to have emotional voids
Mm-hmm.
that need to be filled. And many times, if it leaves us, and I say us because I can only talk about this because I was trauma. You know,
Uh-huh.
look up
Uh-huh.
trauma in a dictionary. My picture should be right there next to it. But
Uh-huh.
it leaves these voids that causes those who have been victimized to be so thirsty, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an addiction. We are addicted to feeling those voids, right? Filling them up,
Mm. Uh-huh.
finding
Uh-huh.
that love till the point of, so just say you've been, your mom and dad was in a volatile relationship. You've
Mm-hmm.
seen that abuse in the household. There really wasn't a good bonding experience with you and your parents, because a lot of times when there's a lot of abuse in the household, the parent, especially the mother, has no time, or really no emotional fortitude, to give anything to you, the child, because they're giving everything to that abuser for the most part. When they stay in that relationship, they're trauma bonded, right? So we witnessed that as children. I did. We witnessed that as children. And regardless of how we want to stay away from it, when we don't have any other examples or anything else that we can, that we can connect to, that is what we know. And that is how we connect. And basically that's the pattern that we follow going into adulthood. So it makes it easy for us to get in relationships that are volatile. It makes it easy for us to get in, relationships that are abusive, whether it be verbally abusive, physically abusive, emotionally abusive, and then hang on to the abuser, because okay, they love us, oh yeah, they have their
Yeah.
issues. They may have, curse me out, or they may have, beat me, or they may be very toxic, and they may be cheaters, and all these things, serial cheaters and all these things, but they love us, oh, they
Mm.
buy us nice things, after the
I
abuse,
have
they
a
come
question
back.
really quick.
Hmm.
I have a question, a side note question.
Yeah.
So, because I'm gonna go from a layperson, because we don't understand trauma like you understand trauma.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
when we think trauma bonding, we think, is it necessarily two people that have experienced trauma that come together and bond? It's
I was
not.
gonna make. I was
Wrong.
gonna make.
Wrong.
I wanted to explain that to you. That's a very big misconception. Okay, because you
Yes,
can miss
that is
out.
the misconception.
Yeah, the misconception is this: it isn't two people who have had similar traumatic experiences that are common, and
Uh-huh.
they bond because of this. That can essentially be a beautiful relationship. And the reason it can be beautiful, because both of those people understand what it takes, right? To
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
heal and to move forward. And basically, they understand the needs of each other, right? When those
Mm-hmm.
people have tapped into their traumatic experiences. If it's untapped trauma, it may be a problem. But when the trauma is tapped, I mean, when people understand their traumatic experiences, getting into a relationship with another person who may have experienced some sort of trauma that's similar to yours, that may not be an issue. It may be a positive thing. So no, that's not considered trauma bonding. That's a
That is
total
such a
misconception.
misconception.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
honestly, that's what I've always thought. But when I'm listening to you explain it, it sounds like trauma bonding is more of a victim or a traumatized person and a narcissist, someone that is taking advantage and benefiting from
Absolutely.
that person being traumatized.
Absolutely, and in most abusers have narcissistic behaviors. They are
Mm-hmm.
narcissists. Also, narcissism is also another buzzword.
It is.
It is very sensationalized, and I really we need to discuss that more, because everybody is calling someone that may have had some sort of narcissistic. We all have narcissistic attributes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Confidence can be a narcissistic. You can find somebody that's
That's
very
true.
confident, and you may be calling them a narcissist, but that's not it. Narcissism is very extreme, and what we're making common situations into narcissistic. We're diagnosing common situations, common adverse situations, and we're making it into narcissism. And it's not narcissism. Narcissism
Mm.
is very extreme. Yeah, you may be involved with a liar who won't tell the truth. Okay, they're just a liar. They're not a narcissist, right? You may be involved with someone can be an avid gaslighter. Doesn't make them a narcissist. Narcissism is a
Mm.
very extreme behavior. And yeah, there are some attributes, and people may have some attributes of narcissism, but to be called a narcissist, it is a very extreme behavior. Very,
Mm. Okay.
very extreme
That's
behaviors. There's
good
a lot
too.
of extremes that comes with that.
That's good too, because like you said, I mean, because we go by social media, we go by the culture.
Absolutely.
A lot of words have been sensationalized and we don't have a clear meaning and understanding of them. So when we talk about trauma bonding, what are some signs that a person has actually that a person is actually trauma bonding? What
Well,
are some
the
signs?
Okay, now let's talk about some of the attributes are definitely going to be when someone is in an abusive relationship and they're addicted and they cannot get out,
Um,
because trauma bonding is an addiction. That person who
mm-hmm,
is being victimized is addicted to that relationship, and that's what makes it very hard for them to get out.
mm-hmm,
It makes it's very hard. So a person who is involved with an abuser and have been for a length of time, and they make
mm-hmm,
excuses to stay in that relationship, that is definitely someone who is trauma
mm-hmm,
bonded. You don't stay in an abusive relationship repetitively. I don't care how much Jesus you have.
mm-hmm.
Let's deal
Right.
with that, because
Yeah.
we use that. Okay, I'm staying with them because God wants me to stay with them. Okay, now I'm not gonna refute the fact of the matter that God may put us in volatile relationships, but He doesn't put
Mm-hmm,
us in volatile relationships for those relationships to remain volatile. If we're in a volatile
mm-hmm,
relationship, that there should be some healing, and that healing should come from both parties, and both parties should seek to be healed. Abusive natures, especially physically abusive natures, can turn into death, right? It can turn into a
absolutely.
real
Absolutely.
dangerous situation. And now, emotionally, verbal abuse, that's another level. It still depletes you. It depletes you emotionally. And anything that
Mm-hmm.
depletes you emotionally also depletes you spiritually. So how
That's
much
good.
can you give God after after so much of your virtue has been taken at the
That's
hands of
really
someone
good.
who's abusing you physically, mentally, and verbally? So anyone who is connected in an abusive relationship, finding it very hard to get out, and they are making excuses, and they are addicted to the love bombing of that relationship. And they deny the fact of the matter that the abuse is greater than the love bombing. An avid sign that
Mm.
you are in a relationship. So I want to add, before you ask another question, a lot of times, we, like you say, we subscribe to this social media. We subscribe to all of this reality TV, the movies that we see, the 80/20 rule, right? You know the 80/20
Mm.
rule, right? The 80/20 rule essentially was um, a project management concept. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that movie, what was it? What was it? Why Did I Get Married? When they were
Uh-huh.
sitting,
Uh-huh.
when the men were talking about that 80/20 rule, when they were there talking about that 80/20 rule, and they talked about you rather have the person that has the 80,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
versus the
Uh-huh.
20. But let's think about the 80/20 rule, when 80% of the relationship is good and 20% of the relationship needs fixing. When the project managers took the 80/20 rule to be able to assess and evaluate what was wrong with their projects. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And where that 20% was, there was 20% of a problem, they would want to work on the 20% to make it better. Not just accept that there was 20% going
That's
wrong with the
good.
project, but they wanted to take that 20%. If 80% of the project was going good, but there was 20% of the project that was, foiled, they wanted
Uh-huh.
to take and work on that 20% to make that project better. Make it a 90%, make it 100% better than what it was, right? We
Not
look
just
at the
accept it.
Right. We look at the 80-20 rule and think, oh, 80% of the relationship is good. Stay in that relationship. What if 20% of that relationship is dangerous and detrimental? That it
Mm.
phases out all of the 80%. If a relationship is 80% good in that a person is doing all the 80% of all of the right things, but they are abusing you physically,
Yeah.
mentally, or verbally, that is not a good relationship. So you still have to be able to evaluate these relationships, these trauma bonding relationships, because of the love bombing, because the person works on that relationship, because there are 7 stages of this type of relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
7 stages. The first stage is the love bombing. Love bombing is this. Love bombing, when you get into a new relationship, right? And that relationship is beautiful, and the person that you're in the relationship with is showering with you with gifts. They're
Mm-hmm.
showering, thank you for putting that up. They're showering you with all the wonderful things, buying you flowers, all the compliments, telling you you are beautiful. That is what
Mm.
that's what happens in the relationship when there
Mm.
is trauma bonding. There's a lot of love bombing, because after that person depletes you, okay, after
How
that
long
person
does that
abuses
last?
you,
How long does that love bombing
for
usually
the
last?
it lasts for the entirety of the relationship. It goes in
Mm.
stages, right? Love
Uh-huh.
bombing. Okay, then they develop the trust. I won't do it anymore. I love you so much. I'm sorry for doing what I did, right? So it can go from love bombing. It can go from that to developing trust and dependence, right? So
Mm-hmm.
making you depend on them for whatever it is. Ain't nobody gonna love you like I do. Ain't nobody gonna treat you like I do. Ain't nobody gonna do the things that I do for you. Okay. Then it's the
Mm.
criticism. Well, I wish you would change this. I wish you would do this, or you do that. And that's what makes me do this. And all of this kind of stuff. It's gonna be your fault, whatever you do. They're critical of you. They love bomb you. Then they develop that trust and dependence. Then they criticize you. And then it's the gaslighting. The gaslighting is a
Mm.
part of a trauma bonded relationship. Of course, they're going to make you feel crazy and going to make you feel like, okay, you're the problem, and no, that's not what I meant when I did what I did. And then there's the resigning to control.
Mm.
There's got to be a control mechanism, and that happens. You lose yourself, the loss of self, and then it's an addictive cycle, and it goes over and over again, right?
So let
Um.
me ask you this, because this
Mhm.
is sometimes we see, I deal with women that are in abusive situations, and sometimes you see women in abusive situations, and we have all kind of excuses as to why we don't leave, from financial reasons to the children to other reasons. How does a woman know when they've crossed over from making excuses or justifying why they're staying to, no, you're literally addicted to this? If we remove all of the reasons, if we remove the kids, if we remove all of the justifications, you would still be there because you've become addicted to this type of relationship. How does a woman know that she's become addicted to this type of relationship?
I would say if a woman has been in a relationship like this, and this is just me, Tammy, there's no science behind this, but I would say if a woman remains in a relationship that's abusive like that for more than a year,
Mm,
for more than a year, then yeah, there's that addictive factor. But the addiction is in you. You ever see a crack addict make excuses to go buy crack, right?
yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah.
Make excuses to do the drug, that's just how that's how this is. One of the things that I want to kind of implement into this conversation:
Mm-hmm.
trauma bonding. Okay, there is no trauma bond without trauma. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
let me hit on the aspect of trauma, because I always, when I talk about things like this, I always want to give people a clear view of what happens when we've experienced trauma.
Mm-hmm.
um the minute you are traumatized, the moment you are traumatized, your life stops.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the vitality, and that the abundant life that you're supposed to experience, right,
Mm-hmm.
is is stagnated at the point when you become traumatized. So I want
Mm-hmm.
every listener to think about this. Let's look at this. Every listener, think about when was it that you experienced your most volatile traumatic experience? Okay, as a little girl, I can remember 5 years old, being five, maybe six, stepping between guns and knives, okay, and
Mm-hmm.
bullets. I was always afraid of balloons because it would pop, because that was the sound of a
Mm-hmm.
gunshot, where I've stood between my father trying to shoot my mom, or fight my mom, as early as a 5-year-old child.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so think about that. The molestation, rape, children who are raped, molested by family members. The earlier we experience those type of traumatic experiences, um, the earlier we are um, violated in a way that we will never ever experience a healthy relationship without divine and therapeutic intervention. So
Mm-hmm.
let's think about it. Let's think about I want you to think about it. When you are traumatized, your life then changes to where you automatically go into defense mode to protect yourself, right? And you develop certain coping mechanisms. They may be fight, flight, flee, fawn, whatever that is, to keep you from ever experiencing that traumatic experience again in life.
That's so true.
Okay?
That's so
So the
true.
thing about it is, the earlier on, the more maladaptive our coping mechanisms are, because we're too immature to make sense of the trauma that we've experienced. So think
Mm-hmm.
about a
Mm-hmm.
child who has been molested, or abused, and how what type of defense mechanisms that they develop to protect themselves. You ever see the
Mm-hmm.
movie?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the movie Precious, right? And you've seen
Uh-huh.
how every time she went to, she thought about those flashbacks came, she developed a way of disassociating those
Yeah.
thoughts, and she went into a fairy tale world. So we wonder why
Mm-hmm.
people live in fairy tale worlds as adults. We wonder why people are pathological liars as adults. We wonder why there are so many maladaptive behaviors as we get to be adults, because with that trauma is still untapped. We're still living in fight, flight, flee, fawn modes. We have developed a way of dealing with people, putting up walls, protecting ourselves from ever experiencing abuse. But so that means protecting yourself from ever getting close in relationship to anybody. And then there's the person who craves what they have not experienced because of attachment styles. They've been neglected, they've been abandoned, they haven't really had the parental support that they need. There's a big void that's left there. So guess what? They go through life trying to find that missing link, trying to find
This
that
is so
missing
good.
person, trying to find that missing father, that missing mother, whatever it is, trying to fill that void of love. They've seen the abuse, they've gone through, all of this stuff in their families, but they're craving real love. But guess what it does? It creates these big voids in us, and it creates these places in us to where we're searching for it. And this is where the addiction comes in with the trauma bonding. We're searching for the love. We find a relationship that probably is almost identical to what we've experienced in childhood, even though we don't want to. Okay, now this is just one aspect of it. And we get into that relationship, and then those moments of love bombing become enough to feed that addiction. So we
Mm.
stay in those relationships, trauma bonded with our with the person who's victimizing us, because that love, just to feel a tad bit love, is enough for us. It's
This is
enough for
making
us.
so much sense. This answers so many questions as to why it is that number one, people remain in these type of relationships. No closing. Why it is that people remain in these type of relationships. Also, why it is that they constantly seek out these type of relationships, looking for a type of love that they've never had. So it answers so many questions. This is so good. So as it pertains to those who are missing certain things, certain aspects of life, from rejection, abandonment, whatever that trauma is growing up, and now they're seeking this type of seeking to fill those voids that they probably didn't even realize they had. Um, at what point do you recognize? At what point do they recognize that, hey, this is a problem and this is actually a void, and now I need to go from trying to fill this void to being healed by this void and actually seeking therapy for this void. Because here's the problem, and this is one of the things that we've substituted the two. So we've substituted um, therapy, counseling, and going through the process with healing and deliverance.
That is and this is the whole thing. This is the whole thing, and this is what is so confusing to the church, because
Mm-hmm.
we've been taught that God is enough, which God is enough. Now, don't get me wrong, because God
Mm-hmm.
is ultimately all that we need. But you've got to think about this. Let's think about this. And I want to give all of you something to think about. I want to give all of you something to think about. We go through saying, God, you're enough. God, you can heal. You can deliver me. We get in the prayer lines. We get hands laid on us year after year. But we go home with the same fractures. We go home with the same behaviors. We go home never ever being able to respond to the deliverance, because there's
Mm.
so much untapped trauma that we refuse to deal with. We disassociate with the traumatic experiences, and we go to church. Let me tell you something. Religion becomes a drug. It
Mm.
becomes it becomes a drug. It becomes a quick fix, instead of really being able to pour ourselves out and be honest. Let me tell you something. The most brave person I know is the person that truly wants to confront and tap into those traumatic events that have them feeling and acting and quietly behaving the way that they're behaving, because there are a lot of people that are quietly traumatized. Me, I was loud and traumatized.
Yeah, yeah,
But there are
yeah, yeah.
many people that come into my office that are quietly traumatized, right? Right? And they go home day after day, year after year, Sunday after Sunday, right? Praying
Mm-hmm.
for a healing from God, but so afraid to really, really tap the trauma. Really
Again,
afraid
this
to tap the
is
trauma.
so
So
good.
you can't get in touch with a God that you won't even allow to get in touch with your trauma.
This is so good. This is so good. You said something. You said religion becomes an addiction.
Yes.
So you take the person that has gone through trauma, they're experiencing trauma, they're experiencing trauma right now in their home, they're in an abusive situation, and then they run to the church
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
praise God and and they
Yeah.
get a good feeling, and then they go back home to trauma, and then they run back to the church, almost as if the church becomes a quick fix to prepare them for the next bout of trauma that they have
The,
to go through.
the church is a place to hide. You're right. The church is a place
Mm-hmm.
to hide, right? And we find ourselves hiding. instead of exposing. Many,
Mm.
and it's sad because, a lot of the leaders are hiding.
Mm. Come
You know,
on now.
so
Don't.
light, light will only, you can only experience light where the light is turned on. You can be in a
That's
place
good.
that has access, mind side, God. You can be in a place that where there's access to the light, but no one
Uh-huh.
will cut the
Uh-huh.
light on.
My goodness.
Our gatherings, when we go to the temple, when we go to the church or to our edifices, the
Mm-hmm.
ecclesia comes together for, to be enlightened, by the power of God that will shine lights on. He said he'll shine the light in every dark place, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Right?
Absolutely.
But if we don't access that light,
Right. Right.
we'll never
That's
will
so
will
true.
never ever be illuminated to change.
And part of that light is exposure.
Absolutely.
Part of that
Absolutely.
light
The
is the
light is
exposure.
exposure.
Why do you believe that we are so apprehensive in exposing what is happening? Is it because of
Because
judgment or is it,
we're afraid. We're image conscious and we're not God conscious.
that's
We
good.
become more we
That's
become
good.
more we become more addicted to an image than we do being healed and being forthcoming
Mm,
about our family experiences, because guess what, you mustn't share the family secrets. You can't tell the family secrets. Yeah, I took a religious trauma class, a certification for religious trauma, and one
mm-hmm,
of the things that one of the professors was saying in that class is that at one time in the in the in the nation, in the United States, it was thought that incest was probably about 1 to 2%. I can't remember the percentage, but it was very low. That the
mm-hmm.
families in the US that were exposed to incestuous type relationships was about 1 to 2%. Somewhere it was very low. He says the issue came when half of wherever the state he was at, half of the people in the state started showing up in his office talking
Mm,
about being traumatized because they've been molested by their fathers
mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
by their mothers or by their uncles or by their brothers. And he was wondering if the entire percentage of what they were saying was showing up in his office came from that state.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I said that to say that is just how dangerous it
Mm-hmm,
is to hold on to trauma, right? It's dangerous because it's like pouring water on a gremlin.
mm-hmm. Oof.
Because when you don't expose that trauma in your in your bloodline, when
Mm-hmm,
you don't
mm-hmm,
expose the perpetrators, when you don't expose what has happened, that that trauma,
mm-hmm,
that transgenerational sin, it
mm-hmm.
perpetuates itself down through the bloodline. And I don't care how far you try to run away from the family. You can't
Jesus.
you can't you can't keep the secret and thank God it's going to shine a light on it. You can't have it
Jesus.
both ways. It's got to be exposed, right? So that
Right.
people can
Let me
live free.
ask.
When I started talking about my story, and I started talking about my genesis, where I came from, it was a hard pill for people to swallow. They knew that I was Pastor Davenport's child. They knew that my mama was his mistress for 15 years. They knew that. They
Mm,
knew that
mm-hmm.
my daddy would come from his house 2, 3 miles down the road and park his big Lincoln out in front of our house and then preach on Sundays. And they knew that me and my mom had our days. It was okay as long as nobody talked about it
Talked
and they
about it.
gossiped about
Mm,
it in quiet. It was okay that he would
wow.
come to our house drunk and beat my mama and, control my whole household when he had a whole family down the street around the corner when nobody, they know the police was coming up over there. It was okay for them to gossip about it. But when I started sharing my story, whoa, is she really telling it?
Wow.
And it took me years up into my adulthood to really be able to tap into that stuff and really deal with it so I could heal.
Hmm.
So I could heal. So every relationship, every trauma bonded relationship I got into was because of what I was exposed to when I was a child.
That's good. I want to go there. Let me ask you this question because I want people to understand. Because a lot of times, like you said, we are so image conscious that we're not God conscious. And so we'd rather deny what has happened to us rather than expose what has happened. How do you know that you've been traumatized? What is trauma? Because some people have been traumatized, but we have normalized it, or become, I don't want to say desensitized to it, but it's just become a norm. And so
It
we've
is.
downplayed what happened to us, not realizing that because we've downplayed it, we can never deal with it. And because we can never deal with it, then we're never going to get the help and the healing that we need. And we're going to continue these type of relationships. How do you know that trauma is trauma?
You
At
know
what
trauma
point
is
do you?
trauma when trauma.
Mhm.
So you know it's trauma when it's trauma is described as any deeply distressing event that takes place in our lives
Mhm.
that causes us to have adverse effects from that trauma, like
Mhm.
nightmares,
Mhm.
like memories, all of those things that are fear,
Mhm.
all of those things that are attached to it. You know that you're dealing with something that has been traumatic, and it does not have to be a big T, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Traumas used to be those big T's, like maybe shootings, storms,
Mhm.
murders, all of those big T's. Those are big T's. Those are big traumas, rapes, all of that stuff are big T's. But what about the adverse experiences that you experienced as a child that
Mm.
cause you to respond, behave, and react the way that you act now? Those experiences are so deeply devastating that you still, as 40, 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old people, the memories are ingrained. And when you are exposed to something that triggers that emotion, it's just like it happened on yesterday.
Mm, triggers. That's a big
Triggers.
word.
Yeah.
That's another one of those words I think you said earlier that we sensationalize,
Hmm.
but it is, and we've kind of normalized it like that's a trigger for me, but we don't take it
Yeah.
serious that some of
Yeah.
these things that are triggering things are really connected to a trauma that you faced growing
Absolutely.
up, or that you actually experienced. And now, because again, we've sensationalized, like, don't talk about that. That's my trigger right there. And so
Hmm.
now we have downplayed that. And I think it's important
Right.
to acknowledge the fact that if there's something that triggers you, especially um, when it triggers you to the place of abnormal behaviors, like behaviors.
Depression and anxiety, ongoing
Yeah.
depression and anxiety are most times attached to trauma. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also, other links of trauma are ADHD. There's a strong link
Mm.
between trauma and ADHD. Okay. And I didn't
Wow.
know that until I was an adult, adult diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. You know,
That's good for these
uh,
moms out here with kids that they diagnosed
yeah,
with ADHD, and you're just medicating, but you're not actually
absolutely.
endeavoring to find out, like, where did
Absolutely.
this come from? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So ADHD and has strong links to trauma. Depression, anxiety is a big one. Anxiety,
Mm.
I have people that come into my office, and all of a sudden they're having panic attacks. And they're in their 30s, they're in their 40s, they're in their 50s, and all of a sudden they one day they can be on their job and they'll start having panic attacks out of nowhere. And then
Mm.
we have to find the root cause of the panic. When was the first time you ever felt anxious, or when was the first time you've ever experienced that? And most of my clients will go, I don't know, but I remember when I was a child and this happened. They can
Mm.
almost verbatim in one breath And in less than 30 seconds of saying, I don't know, but I remember.
Mm.
Trauma is just that strong to where that the memory of the trauma is usually unprocessed on that side of the brain, the one side of the
Uh-huh.
brain, left side of the brain. It's unprocessed.
Uh-huh.
It's still raw material. Like,
Mm-hmm.
good
Mm-hmm.
experiences, you process it. You can talk about the memories of going to amusement parks, all of those good experiences. That traumatic event, you don't know how to process it. But when you get in the midst of something that's familiar to it, it triggers a response. Either fight,
Mm.
flight, flee, or fawn, and you're overwhelmed because a lot of times you cannot pinpoint it when you're going through the anxious moment.
That's very good, and I can tell you that that's very true because I remember when my husband and I were in an abusive stage in our relationship, and I had a horrible spirit of fear. I was very, very afraid, but I did not recognize in the midst of it. All I knew is that when I felt fear come in the room, when I felt anger come in the room, I was out. I get
Right.
my stuff and I leave. I'm out. I get in my car. I go. I grab my child. I'm gone. And it would happen so fast. It wasn't until after I was out of the situation that I realized a loud voice. We could be in a
Absolutely.
conversation and a
Hmm.
sudden movement would
Yes.
cause my heart to start beating fast, and I could feel fear gripping me.
Absolutely.
And so it's very true that a lot of times it's not until you're out of a situation that you realize the side effects that it actually has had on you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let me ask you this question. What comes first? Healing from the church or therapy? Or
Hmm.
are they equal? What comes
I think
first?
they're equal. I think they're synonymous. I think that both are synonymous. That that both of them are equally important, in your life. Um, I think that we I think that we are I think how can I put this? I try to make sure that I don't say things that will offend people,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
I think that we've been hoodwinked in the church. I'm gonna put it that way. I think that we've been
Tell the
hoodwinked.
truth.
I think
Uh-huh.
that a lot of times, because our leaders don't understand their own trauma themselves, i.e., I was
Mm,
one of them. I was a traumatized leader. I didn't understand what was going
that's
on. Just
good.
as
That's
crazy,
really
just as
good.
baddie. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that because people don't understand their own trauma, it's hard for them to present the gospel in a way that will give the entire healing effect of that gospel. So in essence,
Mm,
we have flawed people delivering a flawed, message sometimes that
mm-hmm.
does not allow for a clear avenue of healing. If
That
you
makes
understand
so
what I'm
much. That
if
makes
you
so
get
much sense.
if
That
you
makes
if
so
you
much
get what I'm saying.
sense.
So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that because we have not had the proper information for so
Mm-hmm.
long. I just created a class called the relationship traumatology class over the last 3 years, and I was doing it for my individual clients and my couples. And it's like a trauma boot camp that I do every quarter, and my classes are always full.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching people the effects of trauma, strategies on how to deal with trauma. And I've just developed a leadership traumatology class for leaders.
Oh wow.
Leaders in the industry, for life coaches, pastors, if they want to attend. And it's
We
very
need that
hard.
information.
I just did my first church 2 weeks ago. But it's very, very hard to get leaders and staff members of churches to buy into this. You know why? Because you got to
Mm,
come and deal with your own trauma. So you'll understand how to deal with other people's trauma and not further traumatize them, because that's what's happening in the church too. We're coming to church and
that's good.
people are getting further more traumatized than they were when they're in the streets, because guess what, their trauma responses, which may be promiscuity, maybe drug use, maybe all
Mm,
of these things that we call sin, and then we beat people across the head because they're sinning. because they don't understand the effects of their traumatic things. Oh, you just need to change. Oh, you just need to stop fornicating. You just need to stop committing adultery. You can do it. You can do it. No, find out what the root cause of all this is for me. Why am I behaving? Why am I behaving like this? Because it's tied to something. It ain't just because I want to go out here and do this kind of stuff. What's really happening and what's the root cause of it? Don't throw no oil on me. Talk to me, find
That's
out my
good.
history, my family connections. What was my
Hmm.
family like? What was my lineage like? What was going on in my family? Where the dysfunctions are, where the traumas are, and then you'll understand my behaviors.
That's good. That's so good. But like you said, I mean, that takes leaders saying, I'm willing to get in the dirt with you. I'm willing to go through the process with you to see you
Absolutely.
heal, and not just put a band-aid on what you're going through so that we can
Because that's
control
what
the
we're doing.
behavior.
We're putting
Yeah.
band-aids on oozing wounds. We're putting band-aids on oozing wounds. I didn't
Yeah.
know. I didn't know what was going on in my own life. All I know is that how to
Mm.
be a good preacher. That's what I knew. I knew how
That's
to be a good
that's so
preacher.
good.
I knew how to
That's
be a
so
good
good.
orator.
I pray that many leaders will listen to this. I mean, and even if you don't go, send somebody from your church to go, because
Absolutely.
the church needs to be equipped to deal with people on different levels, and deal with people on different levels, and deal with trauma. Because I mean, the truth is that most of the time traumatized people end up in the church looking for an answer. And if we don't give them an answer, the answer that is necessary in order to bring about true healing from within, then they'll end up temporarily
Yeah.
okay, and then back in that same
Back in the
same
same
cycle.
cycle over and over again.
Let me
Yeah.
ask you this question, because I see this is a whole different story, because understanding trauma and trauma bonding, what trauma bonding really is, for those who just came in, trauma bonding is not what we thought it was, y'all. It's not like two traumatized people getting together. It's really an addiction to trauma. And so we're going to have to come back and do a part two, because I need to talk about this part of it, because marriage,
Absolutely.
okay,
Absolutely.
marriage, like, we have been so careful not to, and I don't ever counsel people into divorce or whatever, but we have been so careful to not tell people the truth and keep them in a trauma bonded marriage,
And so
okay,
that's
for the
where I
sake
and that's
of,
where I come in. I have couples, and the couples that come to my office, I'm a trauma therapist, so I'm
I know some people who
trained.
need to go see you. I'm
Listen, this
telling
is
you.
what it's about. When they come to my office, we gonna hit that trauma. Because what's happening is that the reason y'all fighting is because y'all triggering each other. Because y'all
Mm,
both have trauma, that untapped trauma that neither one of you want to deal with, that come from you feeling like things should be done this way because you were done a certain way in your last relationship. So then you trying to control them over here to make sure they don't do what they're doing to you. And now that's triggering the other individual because the other individual has their own experiences. And basically there's a friction and there's a triggering of that thing. And nobody can it's like they're unhealed. And a lot of times people think because they get saved and
come on.
I tell people all the time, honey, healing ain't healing till you put that thing to work. You see what I'm saying? So
Mm.
you can be saved and unscathed and a new virgin, and you done saved yourself for your husband, and you feel like that make you healed. And I'm telling you, I done heard it all. Oh,
Until you get married.
I waited. Because we feel like healing is in our restored virtue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We feel like if we okay, nah, I'm just gonna save myself for my husband. I'm talking from a woman and maybe a man standpoint too, because I've heard it both from both ends. I'm gonna, I'm saving myself. We always tie toxicity to sexual relationships. Right. Now that could be a
Mm-hmm.
part of it because energy and energy connecting together. We know that marriage outside of the confines of the sexual
Yeah.
relationship, is not permitted or
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
whatever. But what we don't talk about is that is not necessarily the truth, and you can save yourself as long as you want to, and then get married to another person that may have saved themselves, and y'all ain't dealt with y'all trauma. Y'all still got a mess. You still got a
Jesus, come
mess.
on. Now that's a preach. We gotta
You
come
still
back and
got a
talk
mess.
about we gotta come back and talk about marriage trauma
Yeah,
bonding because I want to hit something, and that is you said something earlier, and that is trauma bonding affects other relationships.
absolutely. Every one of them. Every one
How
of them.
does trauma bonding affect friendships? What does that look like? What does
Honey,
trauma
listen. If I could tell my own story, oh Jesus.
what does
That's
trauma
why I
bonding
don't
and
focus on
friendships look like?
everybody else, because I mean everything that I talk about, and I know it sounds kind of raw and sometimes it can hit hard, but I have experienced this.
Uh-huh.
I tell people all the time, oh, I was in a toxic relationship where that person was toxic. How many times can you be involved with a toxic person before you realize that there's something wrong with you and you're attracted to toxic people?
You the common denominator.
You're the common denominator. I had to figure that out, child. You can't be in too many bad, toxic relationships with counterfeit people till you figure out, well, what's going on with me that I'm attaching to all of these counterfeits? Something got to be wrong. Yeah, something wrong with you, child.
Jesus.
You have
Yeah.
created a fairy tale in your mind because you really don't know what relationship is about, and you keep connecting yourself to fairy tales. That's what's wrong, baby. Deal with you.
Jesus.
Deal with you.
Jesus.
Deal with you. That's what's really wrong. That's what has happened to you. Nothing ain't wrong with you, but there's a whole lot that has happened that has caused you to be like this. So we got to understand that toxic relationships, if you're in a toxic marriage, you need to
Mm-hmm.
start evaluating all your friendships.
Woo.
How are those
Woo.
friendships? How are those interpersonal relationships? How are the people that you're connected to? How toxic is that relationship? I remained in a friendship for years. You know, you know,
Mm.
the person walking in and out of my life when they got ready to. Anytime I did something that they didn't want me to do, they were out. Then they were in. Then they were out. And I and
Dang.
I was so connected to that relationship till I thought that they were the only ones that were going to support me. They were the only ones that were going. It was almost like a doggone a romantic relationship
Wow.
until I started healing. When I started healing, Jesus said, "This is the end of it. I'm gonna break y'all up."
When Jesus do it, when Jesus
Jesus
do it,
did.
it's something else.
When I started dealing with my own trauma, when I started becoming more confident of who I was and who God called me to be. You understand what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
my behavior started to change. And I started realizing that I was off in a lot of ways. And a lot of things when you start to heal become so unattractive to you. You know, your
Mm,
your
yeah.
your
Yeah.
your your attributes and your behaviors when you are traumatized, it becomes so ugly when you start healing because you
Mm, yes,
realize, oh
sir.
no, this was not what God created for me. Even the people, my friendships, my interpersonal relationships and my friendships and my connections are so far different now than they were when I was traumatized.
Wow. Wow.
You know,
Wow. Yeah.
the things that interest me now are definitely not the things that interest me when I was traumatized before I started healing. So there is a difference. And a lot of times we stay connected to people who are interpersonal relationships and those social friends who are toxic. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a
Mm-hmm.
form of trauma bonding. It is. Yeah. See
That's
how
good.
see how beneficial those people are in your life. Are they
That,
adding value to it?
that's
Or
so
are they
good. I
only
think that's
around
so
are they
good.
only around for your downfall?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. That's so good because we talk a lot about like um when do you know when a friendship is over? And I think a lot of times we have like especially when you're growing, when you're moving, when you're healing, that you have a guilt, like a remorse, you
Absolutely.
know, from separating from that
Absolutely.
person. So we hold on to childhood friends, although we know that they're bringing us down. We hold on to the people who never celebrate us. You know,
Absolutely.
they never celebrate us, but like you said, as soon as something goes wrong, they on the phone, girl, what happened?
Absolutely.
These toxic relationships. Because I want, especially as women, I want us to understand that there are certain relationships, not just romantic relationships, but like Tammy said, you have to start investigate all your relationships, because if trauma bonding is an addiction that
Absolutely.
takes place in relationships, then that means that every relationship you have can be affected. It can be affected in your professional relationships. You can be
Hmm.
addicted to a boss that just uses you, needs you, and never celebrates you, never appreciates
Absolutely.
you.
Hmm.
It can go into leadership roles, even in the church. You keep finding yourself being addicted to ministries that just want you for your gift, and every time you turn
Yes.
around, so all of these relationships can be affected by trauma bonding. And so I appreciate so much that you explained to us what it really means, to have a trauma bonding relationship, because that causes us to really look at, you know, how many times do we keep ending up in these type of relationships, and how many of these type of relationships do we actually have even now,
Yes.
that we are the
Absolutely.
common denominator for? Are we the one that is addicted to the trauma that these people keep bringing into our lives?
And that is so important. That is so important. You've got to be able to gauge your relationships, and you've got to be willing to change the dynamics of your palette. Your relational palette has to change. You have to force that into. I had to force mine into changing. Oh, I like to do.
Mm,
Oh, honey, I had to force. I mean, just force my relational palette into changing. I mean, because there were certain attributes in men that I was attracted to that were
mm-hmm,
very toxic
mm,
attributes. A lot of times we don't realize that just our type, because everyone goes on, I call it toxic typology. Do a test.
mm,
Do check your toxic typology, and really define what it is you desire in relationship. Because if not, if you've been, and I'm going to say this to everybody, if you've been in two more than two abusive, toxic relationships, you got to check your toxic typology, because
mm.
there's some trauma bonding going on. There's an aspect of trauma, even if you don't stay in the relationship long. Okay, well, I didn't stay in the relationship, but you keep attracting the same type of people, just a different body.
Mm.
So
So
that's
true.
ineffective if you want a long lasting relationship. You got to be
Mm-hmm.
able to attract something that is going to be fortified and long lasting.
That's so good. That's so true. I think that type of introspection is so necessary, especially if you're listening to this now. Like, you're not listening to this on accident. That is so important where you are now. Now, let me ask this question, because I promise you we're going to come back with a part two, because there's so much to this, and there's so many people. We're going to keep putting your information up here, because listen, if I honestly believe that so many people would not be where they are now if they knew that there were people such as yourself out there that are traumatologists, that are experiencing this, and that are out there, and that are going to give you healthy help for what you're going through. I know people now that have been through trauma that are seeing counselors, and I'm like, listen, it's every time I talk to you, it sounds like you sound worse than before you were seeing the counselor, because they're not experienced in what you've
They're
been
not
through. They don't
experiencing trauma,
understand.
and that's it. And that you would
Yeah.
be amazed at how many people come into my office, and I ask them, well, what type of trauma work did you do with your last counselor? I.e. therapist. Oh, well, we just had talk therapy. So you've not done any psychoeducation. You've not been given intervention strategies. You've not, have you done trauma work? Have you? No, we just talk. Okay, there's there. Yeah. So a lot of
I
people
see it
are
all the
not,
time. I'm telling you.
they aren't trained to provide trauma informed care. There's a method to it, and it is a process. You know, it is a process for healing.
So now let me ask you this question. So if let's say a person is in a trauma bonded relationship right now, they realize that this relationship is based off solely off of trauma bonding. What would you advise them to do like right now? What do they need to do? What is the
I
first
think
step
that
they need to do in order to get to move forward in their own healing process?
I think the therapy is very important. They've got to be able to, we got to dig the root up. You got to dig that root up. What
Mm-hmm.
what is the attachment to that type of relationship, and why? Let's start, because let me tell you what I find, Tiana. When you help people understand and normalize, because what
Mm-hmm.
what people do, people have stigmatized
Mm-hmm.
trauma,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so,
Mm-hmm.
so much that has been stigmatized to where people want to maintain certain images, not to
Mm-hmm.
be ostracized or not to be put
Yeah.
out of certain religious groups, not to
Mm-hmm.
look like the
Mm-hmm.
sore thumb in your church, not to
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
of these things. So what happens when when people start trying to express a desire to face their traumas,
Mm-hmm.
they hear something in their ear that causes them to shrink, to say, oh no, I'm going to maintain this image,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
if I
Mhm.
don't,
Mhm.
then I've got to deal with how people feel. I got to deal with how my family feels. I got to deal with what is this going to do to my image in the church, all of these
Mhm.
things that keep them from moving forward. But I'm telling you, for those who are brave enough to move forward, understanding first, there's nothing wrong with you. There are things that have happened to you. And in order to
That's good.
heal, we've got to deal with the things that have happened to you. And we've got to normalize your behaviors, because every
Mm.
behavior, although it looks strange to the naked eye, it is a normal behavior when it's attached to trauma.
Mm.
And so what happens is, oh, you crazy, oh, you this, or why you acting like this, or why you acting like that? Because I have experienced some trauma, and that trauma has me behaving, responding, and reacting like this. It's a trauma response. It's normal to the trauma that I've experienced. Let me tell you something. Being able to deal with my own trauma and getting the education that I've gotten, it has
Mhm.
made me so far more accepting of people and their
Mhm.
behaviors and the
Yeah.
things that they go through, even how
Yeah.
they react and how they respond, because I understand that a lot of our responses and a lot of our triggers and a lot of those severe reactions are tied to experiences that have been devastating for people.
That's really good. I think it's there's so much, and I want to keep talking, but I know we have to come to an end. But I promise you, it's going to be a part two. But there's another part to this because I'm just thinking in my mind. I know people who have been through trauma and they haven't actually healed from the trauma. They've dealt with the trauma to a certain degree that they have become functional, and in their minds they are highly functional, and
Functioning
so they
addicts.
have so they have
Yeah.
limited compassion for others that have been through trauma, because in their mind, if I survived and look at me functioning, then why
Then
are you responding the way you responding?
hmm,
And I find that very common for people who have been through trauma, who never really healed from the trauma. They just survived the trauma. They
yeah,
become very judgmental towards
absolutely.
others who have
Absolutely.
behaviors that are more external. Internally, there's trauma is still screaming out, but
Yeah, and
externally,
I tell you that that's called, they're still silently suffering from the effects of trauma. I guarantee you
mm,
they still operate out of all of those trauma responses. That strong woman, syndrome is one
yeah.
of them. I had somebody tell me the other day, right? I had somebody tell me the other day, and this was so funny. So funny. So they were telling me they had a chance to see me with my person, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And they were like, well, Apostle, we just want to let you know that we just saw you and you just basically turned into this little girl. I said, I turned it. Yeah, you were so giggly. You were so. I said, you ain't used to the soft girl. You ain't. You not you. You. Oh, so
Don't even
you
talk about that.
you ain't used to the healed me. You know, you're used to the hard me that will mask my emotions, but the
My
healed
goodness.
me who is enjoying, being cared for and being loved, and being responsive, that in turn shows a weakness to you instead of understanding that I'm healed enough to be able to appreciate the dynamics of being loved by someone who thinks I'm worthy of being loved. I get
Now
it.
that's like tears for
I
me
get it.
because
I
to
get it.
see the soft girl in women, I always say, every woman, every girl wants to be a soft girl. She wants to be cared for. She wants to be
Absolutely.
taken care of. She's not strong because she wants to, but soft girls have gotten such a bad rap for being weak
Absolutely.
because
Yes.
because we have sensationalized strength in women, not realizing that many women are strong because they had to
Because
be.
we have to. We have to.
Yes,
We have
yes,
to not need anybody because the fact of the matter, we've had to do it. So of
yes,
course we
yes.
listen, that dynamic of not needing anybody. I told people all the time, I know we gotta go. There's an attribute that I see in people, especially men, women too.
Uh-huh.
You remember when you were young, right? We would get in trouble, and the first thing our parents would say, "Go to your room."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Oh, you can't fix your face? Go to your room. Oh, you want to talk back? Go to your room. Guess what happens? So we know immediately if we got into trouble, what we was doing. Some of us got so used to just, I gotta go to my room. I already know. I already know. I gotta go. Go to
Yeah,
my room. I'm
yeah,
gone. I'm gone.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But some of us are still adults going to our rooms because we've
Mm.
never we've never had the permission to be able to express ourselves. We've never had the permission, to verbalize our feelings and our emotions. And whenever a conversation gets a little too challenging,
Uh-huh.
whenever
Oh,
we
this is
don't know
good.
how to handle the adversity that is coming with the
This is good.
conflict, we skip out and we go to our
We go to
room.
our room.
We
That's
isolate.
good.
It's a
That's
trauma
good.
response.
That's good.
It's
Because
a
we
trauma
don't
response.
understand why people shut down. Shut down is
Absolutely.
like, it's
They
me
go to
going to
their
my
room.
room. I'm
They
going
go
to,
to their room.
oh, that's good. That's real, real good. That's good. That is so good. And then sometimes instead of going to our room, you have extroverts that just they act out.
I
So
be, I
I have
be, I be that one. That's that fight. That's that fight. I was that
yeah,
fighter.
yeah. So
Oh
I
no.
see
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
I know two young women that are sisters.
Hmm.
Both experience trauma.
Hmm.
One looks healed because she's an introvert.
Yeah.
The other one looks unhealed because she's an extrovert.
Hmm.
And when you talk to the one, she's always judging the extrovert because she cannot understand why are you behaving in that
Right.
way. I
Hmm.
know you've been through trauma, I've been through trauma, but look at me. And that's
Hmm.
why I go there is I see there's a lot of
So let me help you put this in perspective. Let me help you put it in perspective.
uh-huh.
Success, and overachievers are trauma responses.
Ooh, say it again. Success and
Perfectionism,
overachievers are trauma response.
perfectionism, being
Mm,
overly successful,
mm. Ooh, that's good.
high
That's
achievers,
good.
trauma responses,
That's good. That's
you
so
know, you
good.
know, yeah.
Oh, that's
Independence,
so good.
being overly independent, not
Mm,
trusting enough to submit yourself to any relationship or anyone, you know, being okay by yourself when secretly you do desire to be able to open up to other people, but you can't because you can't trust them enough to know that you wouldn't be hurt. That's a trauma response.
This is so good. Lord have mercy. I know I gotta go because
Vulnerability is a sign of being healed.
that's a key. That's a word. Vulnerability is a sign of being healed.
Yeah.
Your ability to talk about it to
Yeah.
somebody and
Your ability
express.
to connect, your
Mm-hmm,
ability
mm-hmm,
to be open to connect and
mm-hmm.
free to connect and not fearful of connecting. That's a sign of healing.
Jeez. This has been so good. I promise we're coming back with a part two, Tammy. You just have to give me a date and we're coming back with a part two because this is so much information and there's so much. Listen, you guys need to connect to Tammy. There's so many of us that have actually have dealt with trauma, but have not healed from trauma. We've put a band-aid over it, we've covered it up, we've suppressed it because we look very functional, we look like we're achieving, we look like we can do things, especially when we look like we can do things that somebody who's been through the trauma that I've been through would not be able to do. I must be healed
Absolutely.
from this trauma, which is
Absolutely.
not true. Tammy just
Hmm.
told you, high achievers, perfectionism, high success, people that are like that they judge other people based on their level of success
Yes.
and their ability
Absolutely.
to do certain things are all signs of trauma, their trauma responses. So Tammy, can you look at the audience and give them one last word, something that you believe they need to take away from this other than your information? Because I'm telling you, everybody needs to tap into your information. They need to send you an email. They need to log onto your website. You need to make an appointment. I mean, I think we owe it to ourselves at least one time to make an appointment to at least see where we are to ensure that trauma is not affecting our everyday lives.
Absolutely. I just want to say to everybody, give yourself permission to heal, right? I think that we haven't been given permission to heal. I had to give myself permission to heal. A lot of times, I think that I can only speak for myself that I had gone through so much, and a lot of my mistakes and my errors were publicized and
Mm-hmm.
very open. I didn't have the permission to go through what I went through secretly. A lot of stuff because I am an extrovert. Was open. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a lot of my defense mechanism. I'm gonna tell my story before you tell it for me, but give yourself permission to heal. This is the season. I don't want to see anyone leave this earth without being able to live their life to the fullest of their ability without being affected by the trauma. And let me tell you what trauma healing is. Let me tell you what healing from trauma is. Trauma changes us.
Mm-hmm.
And we basically have to be able to radically accept that we've gone through some traumatic events that have changed the trajectory of our lives and has
Mm-hmm.
also changed our worldview and our
Mm-hmm.
views of ourselves. The aspect of healing that you want, okay, you can't reverse the trauma that has happened, but you can reverse how you respond to it, how you react to it, and how you react to others. The thing about that is understanding that you may still experience when you start healing and you tap into that healing, you may still experience those moments where you're triggered, right? But
Mm-hmm.
understanding that it is a trigger, it's attached to that trauma. I'm no longer in that place. I can return that feeling to where it came from, and I can go on and live my life happily ever after. That's what healing looks like. So give yourself permission to be able to experience something so much better than you've ever experienced before.
Thank you so much. This has been such a wealth of information, such a wealth of instructions, and education as well for so many people. Like I said, listen, you owe yourself at least an appointment okay, with Lady Tammy, so that you can at least explore where you are, really explore where you are to ensure that you are on the right path and that you are healed, or that you are on the path, the right path of being healed from the trauma. Because, like she said, you deserve to live a life that God has planned for you. He says He desires that we have the desires of our heart. And so He desires that we live an abundant life. You cannot live an abundant life when your life is plagued by the trauma that has happened to you from childhood even up until now. You cannot live the abundant life that God has planned for you if you are plagued by trauma bonded relationships. So I pray that this information has enriched you, that it has enlightened you, and that it has helped you to get on the right path to finding out those hindrances that keep you from walking in your purpose. Listen, we will be back with a part 2. I will let you guys know immediately. But listen, send this live out to as many of your family members, friends that you know that this information is going to be beneficial to, and it's going to help them to come out of those trauma bonded relationships, to heal internally themselves so that they can get in healthy and whole relationships. Tammy, thank you so much for being with us. We so appreciate
Thank
you,
you
and
so much. I'm so
we will
humbled.
talk with you real soon. Love you so much. Thank you.
Love
Bye,
you.
everybody.